Welcome to the TPG Difference. My name's Sarah Friend, and I'm president of the Partners Group. And today I am joined by three of our employee benefit consultants who work primarily in the mid to large group market here in Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. I've got Case Escher, Chad Kemmis, and Zach Fritz. And today we're tackling the big issue of provider network contracting. It used to be that provider contracts, those contracts between healthcare insurance companies and provider systems, were negotiated behind closed doors. Today, those contracts are negotiated on the front pages of business journals and splashed across social media, getting everyone upset, rightfully so, anxious, and worried about future access to their favorite providers. Today, we're digging into this because provider contracts isn't just about access, it's also a huge issue regarding costs. So, not only what the unit costs are for reimbursement, but ultimately what gets covered by the health plan. And so, today, we're going to look at both sides. We're going to look at the side of the healthcare system, the side of the health insurers, and then ultimately how that impacts employers. And finally, the real victims in all of this, which are members and their dependents. So thanks for joining us. And thanks, guys, for being a part of this conversation. All right. I'll kick us off with my first question. And this is all about cost versus access. So the question is, at a high level, are these contract standoffs actually helping to control costs, or are they just creating more disruption for employees trying to access care? Zach, let's start with you.
Let's go. I would say probably 10 to 20% control costs, 80 to 90% disruptive. I think the challenge is while it's public in terms of the negotiations, we don't get the details.
Yeah.
Right. We maybe at the end we hear a little bit about it, but we don't know, how much we're trying to negotiate. Was it the last point, 2 points, 5 points, whatever? We know that the asks from the provider system in terms of increases have been astonishingly high compared to what they used to be. And so there's something else to give. I'd like to think the negotiations help a little bit, but I don't think probably at the end of the day it's massive. And we know that the outcomes are still huge in terms of increases. Mm-hmm. Better to come to a deal than not. But along the way, it's just super disruptive and causing a lot of stress and angst amongst the membership, employers, employees. Require notices around when these terms are up, get people really nervous. And I just think it's really, really, it's just creating a lot of anxiety. It's very personal, as we all know, healthcare. And so it's tough when you don't think your provider is going to be a network anymore, even though we may, done this for a while. We know it may ultimately come around, but the process is super stressful and creating a lot of anxiety, and maybe to a little bit of benefit. It's kind of how I see it.
Well, it's all about who's controlling the narrative now. Yeah. Like everyone wants to take control of that, where to your point, Sarah, when you open, these conversations used to be just behind closed doors. They kind of happened on a regular cadence, and you had a general knowledge of when contracts were coming up for the various system and the various insurers. So whether it's Cigna and OHSU or Regents and Salem Health or United and Legacy, like we generally had an understanding of when those contracts would be up for negotiation. And at the very worst, it might come down to the final couple months. And that was a big deal years ago. And now, I mean, the news is breaking early on. And it's really interesting to see kind of what are those pieces of data that are shared publicly. Mm-hmm. Because to your point, none of us, none of our clients sit in those rooms. We generally know what's being asked for, but it's about what's being broadcasted publicly that everyone then gloms onto in terms of data points. And so it just becomes very public, the display of kind of power here. Yeah. So I would agree with you. I don't think the cost piece, that's a general narrative. I don't think that actually is improving costs for employers all that much.
Yeah. What do you think, Case?
No, I don't think it's improving costs. I think it's absolutely disruptive, but it's necessary. If we had a carrier, a network
contracting person right here, they would say they are the bulwark. They're the thing holding back all the providers from charging exorbitant rates and burying employers. And you get a provider on here, and they'll say the opposite about the network. They're the ones who are limiting my ability to do medicine and to treat you. So this dynamic has always been involved. In fact, years ago when I was at United, the phrase was negotiation through termination. And with the contracting people, that was the process, but it was never as public. In fact, doing a little bit of research, you can find these stats, but in Q4 of 2025, since the beginning of 2022, it's the highest number of public contract negotiations in the media. Now, there's many more that happen that we don't have access to. But and was 66% higher than Q4 2024, and that was still 30% higher than 2023. It keeps getting louder, and there's more of them. Q4 is when they tend to hit because it's the contract negotiation cycle. Not all of them expire at the end of the year, but many of them do. Like right now, OHSU and Regents are out. They're not in agreement for 2026.
Right.
They're in network technically, but. So if you're covered with Regents or a Blues carrier, you can still go to HSU and to be a network, but technically they have 12 months. They have this year based on when the contract ended. They're going to come to an agreement for sure. They have to, because I don't think Regents has a product.
Well,
They don't have OHSU.
but that's the question, which is like, this is a total power struggle now, right? And the systems are starting to make calculated bets of, are we more important to the community and the people accessing care? And I think largely that calculation's probably right, depending on where geographically you sit, right? If you're in a captive market and you're maybe not in a major metro area and you are a large system, you're vetting that people are going to be more inclined to side with you and want to go to you because there's a kind of a like trust component, I think, of your care delivery and the personal component of it, versus an insurer is just an insurer to a lot of people. Yeah. And so systems are making that bet of, we have more leverage in this community and more power. And then you have insurers also making that same bet and saying, well, we cover X millions of people, we're going to drive them elsewhere. And that's amping up.
It will be really interesting, to your point about who has more leverage, right, in this situation. For a long time, we've enjoyed kind of all of our local carriers have had contracts with all of the systems, right? And so from a network perspective, all the carriers kind of look the same, right, in terms of access. And I'm not sure that that's our future.
Yeah. I agree.
And so whether we stay in a group model or going back to cases, point around ICRAs, right? That if all roads leads to lead to ICRAs for case. But let's just pull that thread for a second. And that is, if you were in an ICRA model and healthcare systems said, we're going to choose one or two insurers to contract with, and we're going to, go be in a narrow network model where we can get, a little bit higher reimbursement, but we're not going to contract with everybody, right? It gives the carrier some exclusivity in terms of that network. Then in the individual market, where individuals can shop and choose their networks, I think a narrow network works much better in an ICRA model than it can work in an employer-sponsored plan, because HR professionals don't want the noise of choosing a limited panel that has to serve the needs of their entire employee population. And so, we're just in this really interesting time. And, obviously with the big news that here in Oregon, with the, selling of Providence Health Plan, that is, I think, also going to be really interesting for the health system to see how the health system responds in terms of their contract negotiations and their strategies with competing healthcare insurers here in this market. So.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I'm from Southern California. I grew up there, and that's a heavy HMO market.
Mm-hmm.
And Oregon used to be HMO centric up until probably 2025, 2026. And most people today who have been in the employer sponsored care for the last 20 years here in Northwest, HMOs are limited to Kaiser, but they've really many of them have never been in an HMO, and which is managed care. But to your point on negotiation leverage and limited distribution, limited contractors, limited contracts and access, that I think that road leads not just to ICHRA, but also leads to higher degrees of managed care. So that the narrow networks is probably going to be a hybrid of the fee-for-service environment we're in now, which is go to any in-network doctor you want, versus you have a gatekeeper now, and referral patterns are now prescribed by a primary care physician. But that really is the only way, I think, to settle the cost issue, because you can't have free for all and expect to be able to control cost too.
Yeah.
Choice is costly.
So one thing I think about right now is there have been fits and starts to try and drive healthcare to more of a consumerism model, right? So you had the high deductible health plan with the HSA that came out. A ton of employers pushed that as a means to get people to go purchase care more intelligently. We know that doesn't happen because nobody can see the price for care. And even with the price transparency laws that have come out, like, you still can't see the price for care. So you started to see some programs develop. I'm thinking like Assurist, for example, that's starting to go down that path. But I'm just wondering if there's enough tension and enough political and public discourse around the state of healthcare and how bad it continues to get, that we start to move more to a direct care, cash pay, like almost non-network structure at some point. I mean, I was talking with friends last night. They're purchasing GLP-1s through Henry Meds.
Yeah.
We have text care now at TPG. I can text my doctor. I can go get a consultation direct with some provider that I will never have a relationship with. I can go to Amazon. I can fill prescriptions. So maybe these are the things that need to start happening to force us out of this group PPO fee-for-service model, because that is not sustainable.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, your point about cost transparency is well taken. And, when we're working with a self-funded employer, we'll use all the tools we can to do some comparison, right? So when they're out to bid for a third-party administrator for their self-funded health plan, we want to make sure that they are not just looking at the admin fees, but of course they're looking at what can they expect if utilization is the same regardless of the TPA, then what can they expect to pay for their claims costs? And I think we do as good of job as we can with the data that is available to do a solid network comparison. What's interesting, though, is...
Quick plug for Handle Health.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's actually... So talk about Handle Health for a second. That's a good point. And how we use that.
Yeah.
You take that?
Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah. So we use a tool through a vendor called Handle Health that basically they scrub the machine readable files that are all public. It's a massive
that no one can understand.
That no one can understand. That would take any regular machine, I don't know how long, days to pull. And
Probably 72 hours.
Yeah, to pull.
When they first came out, I already processed one.
There you go. So now so instead of one, we now can do it quite efficiently. But they are basically looking at all of those systems, and they are looking at net bottom line cost, right? And I think the days of this has the highest that means nothing.
Yeah.
Discount off of is all about what's the baseline, right?
Right.
And so we're now looking at, and this has changed years ago, but looking at net unit cost at the end of the day and assessing which provider network is the most efficient. I think there's probably a little bit of a lag with some of that data just because, all these things are refreshing and like we're talking about. So something that was $100 might be $120 now, but usually that is consistent amongst these carriers are all going through these same processes, right, in terms of contracting. So that's been a great tool. And I think it tells us, at least here locally in Portland and a lot of the metro areas, that they're all pretty close.
Yeah.
Right. But it still allows us to look at which ultimate bottom line network is going to be best for our clients.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and last week I was at the Employee Benefits Leadership Forum and meeting with all of our stop-loss carriers. And obviously, stop-loss carriers have a big stake in which TPA a self-funded employer chooses, because ultimately they're on the hook for the biggest claims, and the biggest claims are what drive your costs. And in every conversation with the stop-loss carriers, they brought up this. We usually talk about unit costs. We're talking about discounts, unit costs, but that's not really what the stop-loss carriers are looking at. What they're looking at is what else is in that contract between the TPA or the insurer and the healthcare system that would prevent any sort of, third-party intervention for cost control. And so in some contracts, right, especially with the largest insurance carriers in the country, stop-loss carriers are completely shut out from any information on multi-million-dollar claims and any ability to help manage those costs or give alternatives to the current form of payment that is guaranteed maybe to that healthcare system in the network, national network.
Those are deal points.
Yes.
So when we talk about legacy and OHSU and these large university health systems negotiating with the BUCAs, with the Blues, the United, that is the Cignas, it's not just about how much does the doctor get paid or how much is a hospital bed day cost. It's about things like pre-authorization.
Yeah.
So pre-authorization is a process. If you've ever had to do it, it sucks. But your doctor says, I need to do X.
Yeah.
And the carrier says, no. You have to justify it, right? And it goes through this process. Providers want less of that.
Mhm.
They want to just practice medicine.
Yeah.
Carriers want to make sure that providers aren't doing things they shouldn't be doing and don't need to do. So that's one of them. Another one of them is exactly what we're talking about now, which is other aspects of the provider-payer relationship that we typically don't see, that stop-loss carriers don't see. And that's another frustrating point in our industry, because there's a lot of vendors out there and they do good work, but their goal is to come and say, we're going to audit your large claims and we are going to basically find waste, fraud, and abuse, and we're going to take it from here to there. And that's going to be our benefit. And we're going to charge you a % of those savings to do that. That all sounds great. Except the question is, who's going to pay that % of savings? Because typically the benefit of what they're doing is to the stop-loss carrier, not to the employer. And that's a little subtle thing that we need to fix. So the stop-loss carriers, next time you're talking to the EBLF, tell them,
Okay.
like, you guys need to be willing to pay these fees when we engage a vendor like this.
Right.
But that kind of goes back to the point solution conversation we just had in our last month's version of this. Is like, then all of a sudden you just start layering in more and more vendors to help control these very one-off events that tend to happen. And the massive jumbo multi-thousand life companies that have benefits teams, they can do that. And there's enough volume going on that it makes sense. It's super hard for a 250 to 500 life, good-sized company in the markets in which we operate to effectively do anything about that. And then again, you're just starting to layer in more and more point solutions, more and more vendors. And all of a sudden you have 12 different vendors in there trying to steer care and audit claims, all sorts of stuff. And it just gets really convoluted out. Totally.
Well, if fully goes away, you could basically just pre-tax set a certain amount for your employees to go buy their own healthcare in the individual market. If only there was a little bit of a way.
Well, I love that we continue to have this debate about the future of benefits. Okay, I want to dig a little bit deeper, going back to the use of media and kind of rage baiting, right? The community to, and both sides do it.
Right.
That the health plan does it, and the health systems do it, right? My question about that is really um, at what point can we and how do we turn down the volume a little bit, and can we do we have any influence over that, or can we do a better job of communicating to our members to just say this is a part of the normal process, and when and how to get really really nervous about something.
Yeah.
Because what percentage of the time do these negotiations actually work out in a deal?
Well, that's a good point, and there is one relatively recent negotiation that broke precedent. A deal wasn't reached,
Mm-hmm.
and that's caused issues.
Yeah.
It causes issues for the employers in that geography. It
Mhm.
causes issues, still causing issues for the carrier, which didn't come to agreement. That the health system also is suffering from that,
Mhm.
and it's problematic that they didn't come to an agreement. But by and large, I was just telling my mother-in-law this with Legacy and the Blues. They're on Medicare plan, and they were nervous. I said, "Don't. It'll get settled. It'll get settled. Don't worry." Well, here's what ended up happening is that this is the second time it's happened in 3 years. And she's like, I don't want to have to go and switch my doctor again.
Mhm.
And she ended up preemptively moving from Legacy to the Portland Clinic for primary care.
Mhm.
Ended up getting settled, but you know what? Legacy already lost that one. That one
Yeah.
increase happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's pretty easy in our industry also to pick a side, to villainize one side of this. And I don't think that that's fair because, obviously, we have a lot of clients who are healthcare providers. We talk to their CFOs. We sit in their board meetings. We understand. So let's talk a little bit about the reality of the pressures on providers and healthcare systems versus, I don't want this conversation to be too heavy on one side because there's a reason they need increases in revenue. So for those of you who work with healthcare providers, talk a little bit about their reality in this scenario.
Before we do that,
Yes.
I do want to address your prior question a little
Okay,
bit too.
yeah.
And then you guys work a little bit more with provider systems than I do, but I think that it's easy for the reactivity around these negotiations
Yeah.
to cause, like I said earlier, this anxiety level. And our job, I feel like, is to be the voice of reason. And I feel like if we have, and our goal always is to have a true trusted advisor role with our clients. And if that is established and that's real, you can work with your clients and who can then work with their employees to help tone down all the noise, right? And I think cases point, we all have groups with regents here locally. We all knew pretty much what was going to happen at the end of the day with the legacy. So you have a choice. Do you elevate the fear, or do you say, we've seen this before, we've seen this many, many times before, even though it's a little bit more public, even though it's a little bit more contentious, we know both are too big to fail, right? At the end of the day, they need each other too much, right? There's probably situations where that's not always the case, but so just not, I think that's our job is to not shy away from it, but to also be really clear, we've done this, we know this is how it works. And to your point where we're about to get into, it's not a one-sided deal.
Yeah.
Right? The provider's probably asking for an unprecedented increase. And then the carrier's doing their best to control it, but then the provider's also dealing with probably unprecedented cost increases.
Exactly.
Right? So it's not necessarily unwarranted. So
Right.
it's just different now. Right? But a lot of the fundamental approaches to helping our clients with what do we do, haven't changed. So
Well, and I think the other part of that I think we do really well is helping to, make sure people don't get overly anxious, but also making sure that they know we're going to help them with a plan B. Like in a worst case scenario, if they really don't come to terms with in their negotiation and they actually fall out of network, that we've got them covered and we are building a safety net. And so, hopefully they won't need the safety net. And in the event that they do, here's what we're working on and here's what it is.
So let's talk about kind of why this is happening, because I think that's an important piece that does not get shared publicly, right?
Yeah.
So, Case, you're best equipped to talk about this, but maybe if I just tee it up, like this is cyclical. So every party in healthcare has a role to play here, and it's similar to the concept that we talked about in our captive or exclusive episode, I think, around a doom loop of like actuarial costs if captives aren't growing. This is a bit of a doom loop in terms of cost increases based on each respective stakeholder in the system, right? So you can get into more detail on this, but as the provider costs go up, they need to ask for more reimbursements. That then trickles down to the employer. That then trickles to union negotiations because costs are going up. Unions that go to the providers demand more money. And so this is the cycle that we're in. But you have looked at some very specific data around this.
Yeah. And, going back to, the current doom loop we're in now started with COVID. It really did. And if I'm, if I can just pretend to be a hospital CFO right now, to your point, here's what I'm facing. I'm facing since 2021 or early mid 2020 negative operating margins. Okay, so I actually was in our market anyway. I know there are some for-profits across the country that didn't experience this, but in the Northwest and the West in general, including California, many nonprofit health systems experienced negative operating margins quarter over quarter. At the same time, part of that's because of care was inhibited because of COVID and everything else. Part of it was because nurses became much more expensive, and there were these mandates around certain things they maybe not wanted to do, and they can go somewhere else. So there were all these pressures on health systems in our market that created a very tough operating environment, and a few of them went under, or they got acquired, or got merged with others. So that's where we've been. Now, since then, if I'm a CFO, what I want to do is I want to get back to a normalized operating margin. I need to get back to, I don't say break even, but I need to get back to normalcy, because I've got equipment I have to maintain. I've got machines I have to build. I've got labor unions I have to negotiate with. And so I need to get back to a healthy, decent operating margin, which isn't much, but it's above zero. Now, so that's one reality, which is backward looking. And since COVID, all of those things, if not more, have all contributed to these higher increases. This cycle that's happened since 2022 of more and more tenuous negotiations between providers and payers. I'm not historically that's been exacerbated by the payer mix, which is every hospital system gets some of the revenue from the state plans, Medicare, Medicaid. They get some of it from the commercial market. Most of them get most of it from the state and less from the commercial market. But now, looking back is what I just said. Now let me look forward. Right? What I would look forward to, if I know what I have to look back to, what I would look forward to is through the One Big Beautiful Bill, these Medicaid cuts. So especially in states that it took the incentive to expand Medicaid through COVID, those Medicaid cuts are sometimes in many ways getting reduced, or they're expected to get reduced. So as you're looking forward, you're going, well, even though they're not my best payer, they still had insurance, and I was still not having to write off the care I delivered. So you've got, on one hand, I need to get back to a decent operating margin net, and also, but the future does not look great. And so I said this before, it's kind of crude, but
Under public plans.
Under public plans.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Under, in the healthcare market, the crap rolls downhill, right? And it's not just our industry. It's an old expression, but parked at the bottom of that hill where all of it gathers are the employers. It's the commercial market, right? That's where it all sits in terms of the pressures on costs and everything that we're seeing. And within each employer, really, It's the member.
Mhm.
Because we don't want to, and we want to avoid villainizing each side, but there is a victim. And that victim isn't the CFO. I mean, it is kind of, I feel bad for them. It's not the HR manager. It's not us. It's the member. It's my mother-in-law, right? Who just wants to go to the doctor and just get taken care of and pay whatever she agreed to pay as far as copay goes. That's the victim in all this. And that's the worst part.
Well, our role as brokers are trying to make sense of all of this and make it as easy as possible for decision makers, for plan sponsors, and ultimately, we can't help your mother-in-law because we don't do Medicare, but for those covered by employer-sponsored plans, right? It's our role to make it as good as possible ultimately for those members. So let's look forward to 2027 renewals in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, which is our key markets. What are you guys going to be doing around this conversation of networks? And what advice would you give to those CFOs, business owners, and HR leaders in terms of maybe if they're not working with the partners group, what questions should they be asking as they move forward and try to make the best decisions they can for their members in 2027?
The first thing we're doing is finding new homes for our province groups.
Yes.
You touched on that. We haven't dug into that, and maybe we're running out of time. But the exit of the Province Health Plan in our market is big ripples. They're the third largest insurer in our state, and them not being able to make it another year is causing a lot of disruption. Whether you're fully insured or self-funded in our market, so I would say that finding homes for those employers and new carriers and new TPAs is really all hands on deck right now.
And I would just say you bring up a good point around bringing Providence back up into this conversation, because to me, that goes back to another point of evidence that there is real distress on both sides of the equation. There is pressures on health plans. There are real pressures on providers, right? And so again, going back to this tension, it is because both sides are truly feeling it, right? And so it's been a long time since we've lost a health plan in our market. And I can't recall in my 30 years that we've ever lost one this big. So it's good point. We've got a lot to do for 2027 for all of those groups who are currently covered by Providence.
I think the other thing it's kind of comes full circle on some of the other topics we've had is, what can we do to have a little bit more control of our own destiny, so to speak?
Yeah.
I think depending on employer size, and we've obviously talked a lot about captive self-funding, how can we get out of the system, so to speak, right? I think carrier trends are not going to go down anytime soon. If anything, I just talked to Regents earlier.
They're just accelerating.
They're just going to keep accelerating. And so we're going to keep seeing that. So if you're in a fully insured environment, you're stuck with that. You don't get to control your own destiny. So making sure we're talking to our clients about alternatives to the traditional model, even though it's still maybe an employer paid model, doing it differently. And then of course, like I've been, and I know these guys have too, just all my clients talk about text care, trying to just get out of the system altogether, so to speak, right? I mean, just give them a solution that's a fixed cost model that CFOs don't have to worry about, fee for service or whatever, and employees or members don't have to worry about, can I access care?
Yeah.
Did my doctor retire or do I need to switch? Okay, legacy's in, legacy's out, whatever, right? So thinking about alternatives to the kind of the way we've always done it. And I think that is a really, I think our clients and prospective clients are really receptive to those ideas because it's different and it's like, they feel like they don't, it's kind of feels slimy to feel stuck, right? Because like, I know I have to work within the system because if I don't, I might lose my best talent or whatever, but at the same time, what can we do to augment it and help to, even move some of that cost off the system? So that's what I would say we do a lot of.
Well, and I think that the text care solution, it is so interesting because that to me, it's like of all the things to be optimistic about, right? It's a new benefit that actually it's not just making up for all lost care and lost access. Actually, it elevates the consumer experience well beyond the current ecosystem of how people navigate healthcare. And so I am really, of all the things that I think employers should be looking forward to in 2027, if they haven't already considered text care, they really should be looking at it.
I think, yeah. And I'm pretty hopeful for where things are going. Again, we're in a dark place right now. 2027 renewals are going to be bad. And so I think my comment to the general market and like employers that are out there who may be watching this, I hope our audience is growing, is yeah, everything's on the table now. And I'm hearing that. We are hearing that this year.
Yes.
Like that statement, Chad, everything is on the table. Do you have ideas for us? Yes, we do. But we have to take each individual client separately and uniquely. And so I think that sets us up. And of course, I'm biased. I'm sitting here at TPG's office, but like being an agnostic, independent, third-party advisor and being able to help them navigate whatever option might work best for them, given their demographics, given their dispersion across the country, I think sets us up better than some of our competitors in that respect. I also think as if we can get through these next few years, I do feel like that there's an underlying momentum starting to build, getting away from fee for service, getting away from this traditional, hey, insurance should pay for everything, right? That is not what insurance is supposed to do. Like if you go back to the beginning of time and the first insurance contract, right? You're insuring against a catastrophic risk. And we've talked about this multiple times. Like we now have insurance that we expect to pay for everything. And that's just exacerbating this problem. So as we can give people more user-friendly technology with great interfaces that's easy to use, text care, medications, biometric monitor, like this will continue to improve and empower people to hopefully live healthier lives. But this current fee-for-service PPO world that we're living in, I just don't see it much longer.
Okay.
May not be ICRA.
Well, we generally
We'll see.
We generally end these episodes on predictions, and so that's a good one. Case or Zach, anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Well, yeah, I'm like Chad. It's not all bad. There are some green shoots out there that employers can do. To your point, what would you tell a CFO? Here's what I would tell a CFO. I tell them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. And I think far too many of our people talking to our clients, talking to our prospective clients, they're telling them things that are tickling their ears that they want to hear. And back to our point solution conversation and many of our other sessions is, the average purchaser, whether it's the CHRO, the CFO, they need an advisor who's representing them, who's telling them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. Because like many of those promises go unfulfilled, and that tends to lead to higher cost. And it's very difficult to point to that, but we see it every day, right? We see it happening in the market. We see it happening with clients, prospective clients we talk to. Get a good advisor. There's not that many of them out there. We're not the only ones, but we tend to be better than most. So that's what I tell a CFO. Have somebody on your side. Have somebody who's not just competent, but ultra competent, who's going to help you through all this.
What a great sales professional.
Well, look at this guy.
We changed him.
I know, we really have. Yeah.
I'll get even.
Yeah.
For calling me a sales professional.
I don't know if it's a prediction for any time soon, but I think, going back to the foundational topic of provider networks and carriers and systems and whatnot, I do think that there's going to be down the road more alignment between carrier and specific system versus kind of like we started off.
Yeah.
Like, you can't have it all.
Right.
Right. So I do think there will be a day, and it probably isn't going to be that long before there's going to be more of that.
Yeah.
For survival, honestly, in a lot of ways, kind of like you can pick your plan on the individual side to align. Like employers don't have that option as easily. So I think that there will be some more organic kind of work done to kind of align. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you for leaning into this topic. It's an important one. It's one that's causing a lot of stress and anxiety for our purchasers and for members. I agree with your predictions around something's going to change, right? And whether that is alignment, and so carrier A is aligned with health system B, and you just kind of have the mix and match if that is the next evolution, or if we evolve even more than that, really away from a fee-for-service system. Time will tell. But Case, to your point, having somebody who truly understands root cause and addressing it there instead of just making it look like we're dressing something up that doesn't actually address the root cause. It is really important for employers to have somebody who's willing to tell them what they need to hear and the reality of a situation so that they can make the best decisions possible ultimately for their employees and their families. So thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
The information in this video is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, financial, insurance, or HR advice. Viewers should consult with a qualified attorney, insurance professional, or HR expert for guidance specific to their situation. The views expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of their employers or affiliated organizations.